Chapter 1, The Beginning. Volya was a brilliant physicist who worked at a research institute in Moscow. He had a deep love for science and was dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Volya had always been fascinated with the mysteries of the universe, and his research focused on developing new theories to explain the fundamental workings of the cosmos. One day, while Volya was conducting experiments in the laboratory, he discovered something extraordinary. He had stumbled upon a new particle that had never been observed before. Volya was ecstatic, as this discovery could potentially revolutionize the field of physics and lead to new discoveries and technologies. However, Volya soon found that there were others who were also interested in this discovery. He received a message from an unknown source warning him to keep his research secret and not to share his findings with anyone. Volya was puzzled and frightened, as he did not know who was sending him these messages or why they were trying to stop his research. Despite the threats, Volya continued to work on his research in secret. He spent countless hours in the laboratory, analyzing data and conducting experiments. Eventually, he was able to develop a new theory that explained the properties of the particle he had discovered. Volya published his findings in a top scientific journal, and the scientific community was stunned. His theory was met with both excitement and skepticism, but over time, it gained acceptance and recognition. Volya's discovery had opened up new avenues of research, and he became known as one of the most brilliant physicists of his time. Years later, Volya received a message from the same unknown source who had warned him to keep his research secret. This time, the message was different. It was a message of gratitude and admiration, thanking Volya for his dedication and courage in pursuing his scientific discoveries, even in the face of danger. Volya never learned who the sender of the messages was, but he was content in knowing that his work had made a difference in the world. Over the years, Volya continued to make groundbreaking discoveries in the field of physics. His work had far-reaching implications, leading to new technologies and advancements that changed the course of human history. Volya became a respected and revered figure in the scientific community, admired for his intellect, dedication, and perseverance. However, Volya had never forgot the mysterious warnings he had received years ago. He remained vigilant, always mindful of the possibility that his work could attract unwanted attention. He kept a low profile and rarely spoke publicly about his research, preferring to focus on the science and let his work speak for itself. Despite his caution, Volya's research eventually caught the attention of a powerful and dangerous group. They saw the potential for profit and power in his discoveries and were determined to exploit them for their own gain. Volya was once again faced with the prospect of danger, as he found himself in the crosshairs of a group that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. With his life in danger, Volya was forced to go into hiding. He left his home and his work behind, disappearing into the shadows to evade his pursuers. For years, he lived a life of anonymity and secrecy, moving from place to place and always looking over his shoulder. But even in hiding, Volya continued to work on his research. He knew that his discoveries were too important to be abandoned, and he refused to let his work fall into the wrong hands. Despite the danger, he continued to pursue his scientific passion, driven by a desire to understand the mysteries of the universe and to leave a lasting legacy for future generations. In the end, Volya's determination and perseverance paid off. He was able to complete his research and publish his findings even while living in hiding. His work helped to change the course of history, leading to new technologies and advancements that improved the lives of the millions. And though he had to live his life in secret, Volya remained proud of the contributions he had made to the world of science, and he continued to inspire others to pursue their own passions and dreams. Chapter 2. Stongislav Volya had always been dedicated to his work as a physicist, but when he met Gwen, everything changed. She was a brilliant mathematician and an accomplished researcher in her own right. Volya was immediately drawn to her intelligence, her wit, and her beauty. As they worked together on a joint project, Volya found himself becoming more and more obsessed with Gwen. He was torn between his love for her and his desire to complete one last project that he believed could change the course of human history. He struggled to balance his scientific passion with his growing feelings for Gwen. Volya found himself spending more and more time with Gwen, unable to resist her magnetic pull. They worked long hours in the lab, lost in deep discussions about science and mathematics. Volya found himself falling deeper and deeper in love with Gwen, but he could not shake the nagging feeling that he needed to finish his project before it was too late. As the deadline for his project approached, Volya became increasingly consumed with his work. He spent long nights in the lab poring over data and analyzing results. Gwen tried to be supportive, but she could see that Volya was struggling with his priorities. She knew that he loved her, but she also knew that his work was his true passion. Finally, the day of Volya's deadline arrived. He had been working non-stop for weeks, barely eating or sleeping. Gwen watched as he made his final calculations and wrote his final notes. She knew that this project was important to him, but she also knew that he was neglecting his own well-being in his pursuit of scientific greatness. When Volya finally finished his project, he was exhausted but elated. He had done it. He had accomplished something that no one else had ever done before, but as he looked up at Gwen, he realized that he had been so focused on his work that he had neglected the person he loved most in the world. In that moment, Volya knew what he had to do. He turned to Gwen and took her hand. "I love you," he said. "You are more important to me than any project, no matter how important it may seem." Together, Volya and Gwen left the lab and walked out into the sunshine. They knew that there would be more projects, more discoveries to be made, but for now they were content to simply be together. They held hands and walked off into the distance, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Chapter 3. Haunting memories. The world was in chaos. War had broken out, and Volya knew that he would soon be called to fight for his country. He'd spent the last 5 years with Gwen, building a life together and raising their daughter Stacy. But now everything was at risk. As Volya prepared to leave for the front lines, he could feel the tension between him and Gwen. They had always been able to talk openly and honestly with each other, but now they seemed to be constantly on edge. Gwen was worried about Volya's safety, and she didn't know how she would manage on her own with a young child to care for. Volya, for his part, was preoccupied with the war effort, consumed by the need to do his part and make a difference in the world. As they said goodbye, Volya held Gwen tightly. "I will come back to you," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I promise." But as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into years, Volya's promise began to feel like an empty one. Gwen tried to stay strong for Stacy, but she missed Volya terribly. She worried about him every day, wondering if he was safe, if he was alive. Meanwhile, Volya was struggling to survive in the trenches. He had seen things that no one should ever have to see, and he had lost friends that he would never forget. But through it all, he held on to the memory of Gwen and Stacy, knowing that they were the reason he was fighting. Finally, the war ended, and Volya was able to return home. When he saw Gwen and Stacy waiting for him at the train station, his heart swelled with joy. He ran to them and embraced them, holding them tightly as tears streamed down his face. As they walked back to their home, Volya and Gwen talked about everything that had happened in the years they had been apart. They talked about the inventions they had made, the discoveries they had uncovered, and the challenges they had faced. They knew that their relationship had been strained by the war, but they were determined to walk through their differences. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. And as they looked due to their daughter Stacy, they knew that they had everything they needed to build a bright future together. As Volya settled back into his old life, he couldn't help but feel a sense of restlessness. He had seen the devastation of war firsthand, and he knew that he wanted to do everything he could to make the world a safer place for his daughter Stacy to grow up in. So Volya dove headfirst into his work once again, determined to create inventions that could prevent future wars and make the world a better place. He spent long hours in his laboratory, poring over blueprints and schematics, tinkering with gadgets and machines, and experimenting with new ideas. Gwen watched Volya work with a mixture of admiration and concern. She knew how passionate he was about his work, and she understood that he wanted to make the world a better place for their daughter. But she also knew how all-consuming his work could be, and she worried that he would lose himself in it again, just like he had done before. Chapter 4. The obsession one day, as Volya was working late into the night, Gwen came to him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Volya, please come to bed," she said softly. "You need to rest." But Volya shook his head, his eyes fixed on the work in front of him. "I can't," he said. "I'm so close to a breakthrough. Just a few more hours, and I'll have it." Gwen sighed, knowing that she couldn't persuade him to stop. But she also knew that she couldn't just stand by and watch him work himself into exhaustion. So she made a decision. The next day, Gwen took Stacy out for the day, leaving Volya alone in the house with his work. But instead of working on his inventions, Volya found himself unable to focus. His mind kept wandering back to Gwen and Stacy, and he realized how much he had missed spending time with them. That evening, when Gwen and Stacy returned home, Volya was waiting for them with a smile on his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I've been so obsessed with my work lately, but seeing you both today made me realize how much I've been missing out on." Gwen smiled back at him, relieved to see that he was coming back to himself. "It's okay," she said. "I understand how important your work is to you, but just remember you have a family who loves you, and we want to spend time with you too." From that day on, Volya made a conscious effort to balance his work with his family life. He continued to work on his inventions, but he also made time for Gwen and Stacy, taking them on trips, playing with Stacy, and just enjoying the simple pleasures of life. And in doing so, he found a sense of happiness and fulfillment that he had never known before. Chapter 5. The lost Stacy was playing with her toys in the living room when she heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. She couldn't make out what her parents were saying, but she knew they were arguing about something. Curiosity getting the best of her, Stacy crept over to the doorway and peeked inside. Her parents were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island, their faces tense and their voices raised. "But what about Philippe?" Gwen was saying, her voice tight with frustration. I told you it's nothing," Volya replied, his voice equally tense. Stacy didn't know who Philippe was, but the way her parents were talking about him made her think he must be important. She tried to listen in on their conversation, but they were speaking too quietly for her to hear anything else. Feeling left out and confused, Stacy wandered back into the living room and sat down on the couch. She wished her parents would stop arguing and just tell her what was going on, but she knew that wasn't going to happen. Instead, Stacy tried to distract herself by playing with her toys but every time she heard her parents' voice rising in the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Finally, after what felt like hours, her parents emerged from the kitchen, their faces still tense but their voices quieter. Stacy, Volya said, coming over to her. We're sorry you had to hear us arguing like that. We just had a disagreement about something. Stacy looked up at him, still feeling confused. Who's Philippe? She asked. Gwen and Volya exchanged a look, and for a moment Stacy thought they weren't going to answer her. But then Volya sighed and said, Philippe is an old friend of ours. We were just talking about him, that's all. Stacy didn't know if she believed them, but she could tell that they didn't want to talk about it anymore. So she nodded and went back to playing with her toys, still feeling a little uneasy, but glad that her parents had at least tried to explain things to her. After putting Stacy to bed, Volya went back to the living room where Gwen was sitting on the couch, a look of concern on her face. Volya sat down next to her and took a deep breath. Gwen, I need to talk to you about Philippe, he said, his voice soft and low. Gwen looked at him, surprise and concern written all over her face. What about Philippe? She asked. Volya hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. Philippe was my war buddy. We were close. We did everything together. When we were out there in the cold, Philippe was always warm. He had a way of making things seem okay, even when they weren't. Gwen listened silently as Volya talked, sensing that this was a painful memory for him. She had known that Volya and Philippe had been friends, but they had never really talked about him before. It was hard out of there, Volya continued. We had to do things we didn't want to do, things we never thought we were capable of. But Philippe was always there, reminding us why we were doing it, telling us that we had to do what was necessary to survive. Volya's voice trailed off, and for a moment he sat there in silence. Gwen reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Volya, I had no idea, she said softly. Volya looked at her, a sad smile on his face. I know, I never really talked about him before, but I just want you to understand, why he was so important to me. Gwen nodded, understanding dawning on her face. I do understand, and I'm here for you, Volya, whatever you need. Volya smiled gratefully at her, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. It wasn't easy talking about Philippe, but he knew it was something he needed to do, and with Gwen by his side, he knew he could get through it. Volya looked at Gwen, his eyes filled with love and tenderness. He took a deep breath and then began to speak, his voice low and rhythmic. My love for you is like a gentle breeze that softly brushes through the trees. It whispers through the leaves and sings of all the beauty that true love brings. My love for you is like the morning dew that glistens on the grass in hues of blue. It sparkles like the stars above and fills my heart with warmth and love. My love for you is like the ocean's waves that crash upon the shore in a beautiful display. It ebbs and flows with the tide and fills my heart with joy and pride. My love for you is like a rose in bloom that fills the air with sweet perfume. It's soft and gentle, yet strong and true. And I promise to always love you. When listened to Volya's words, her heart overflowing with love for him. She knew that he was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was always from the heart. She leaned in and kissed him softly, feeling the warmth of his love surround her. I love you too, Volya, she whispered as they pulled away from each other. More than anything in this world. Volya smiled, feeling grateful and content. With Gwen by his side, he knew that he could face whatever life threw. Chapter 6, Happy Times. Volya was hunched over his workbench, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had been working on a new invention for weeks, but no matter what he tried, he couldn't get it to work. Frustration boiled inside him as he tried yet another failed attempt. Just then, Gwen walked into the room, a small smile on her face, as she watched her husband work. What are you working on, Volya? She asked, curiosity lacing her words. Volya sighed heavily, not looking up from his work. Just another invention. It's not going well, he admitted. Gwen walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe I can help," she said softly. Volya looked up at her, surprise etched on his face. "Really? How?" he asked. Gwen leaned over his workbench, studying his invention intently. "Well, have you tried adjusting the power source? It looks like it might be overloading," she suggested. Volya's eyes widened in realization as he tried her suggestion, and to his surprise, the invention began to hum to life. Gwen chuckled as she watched the look of surprise and gratitude cross her husband's face. "I guess two heads really are better than one," she quipped. Volya smiled, grateful for his wife's help. "I guess so," he said, joining in on the playful banter. "Although I'm pretty sure I'm still the genius inventor in this family." Gwen rolled her eyes with a smile, happy to have lifted her husband's spirits. Chapter 7. Past revival. Volya's heart skipped a beat as he read the message from the unknown sender. It had been years since he had last received a message like this, and the memories of the danger and uncertainty it brought back flooded his mind. He read the message carefully, his mind racing as he tried to decipher its meaning. The instructions were specific and detailed, outlining a plan of action that Volya knew would require all his skills as an inventor. He looked up at Gwen, his face etched with worry. "Gwen, I just got another message from that same unknown sender. They're asking me to build something again," he said, his voice filled with concern. Gwen's eyes widened in shock,
memories of their past struggles flooding back. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice trembling. Volya handed her the message, and she read it carefully, her face growing pale. "This is serious, Volya. We can't ignore it," she said, her voice filled with determination. Volya nodded, knowing that his wife was right. They had faced danger before and had come out on top, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now and the risk greater.
Together they began to plan, poring over the details of the message and working out a strategy to ensure Volya's safety while he worked on the mysterious invention. It was a race against time, but they were determined to see it through. As Volya got to work, his mind buzzing with ideas and plans, he felt a sense of purpose and determination wash over him. He knew that this was what he had been born to do, to use his skills and knowledge to create something that could change the world. And with Gwen by his side, he knew that he could do anything. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, and nothing could stand in their way. Volya and Gwen worked tirelessly on the nanite bomb and the suit to supply it with energy. It was a challenging task, and they had to put all their skills and knowledge to work to make it a reality. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Volya and Gwen worked long hours, barely stopping for sleep or rest. But they were determined to see the project through to the end, no matter the cost. Finally, after months of hard work, the nanite bomb was ready. It was a small but powerful device that could change the course of the war. And the suit that Volya had designed to power it was equally impressive. A complex web of wires and circuits that could supply the bomb with the energy it needed to supercharge it. But as they stood back and looked at their creation, Volya and Gwen knew that the stakes were high. The bomb was a weapon of mass destruction, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could cause untold damage and destruction. But they also knew that the cause was just. They were fighting to protect their country and their way of life, and they would do whatever it took to ensure victory. With a heavy heart, Volya donned the suit and took the nanite bomb in hand. It was time to go to war, to fight for what was right and just. As he stepped out into the battlefield, Volya knew that the risks were high, but he also knew that he had Gwen's love and support, and that was all he needed to face whatever came his way. Together, they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with in the face of adversity. Chapter 8. The uprising. Volya felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he met with the mysterious person who had sent him the plans for the nanite bomb and suit. The person was cryptic, and Volya still had no idea who they were or what their intentions were. As he tried to engage the person in conversation, they remained elusive and enigmatic. But Volya persisted.
Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, after what felt like hours of conversation, Volya finally managed to extract some information from the mysterious person. They revealed that they were part of a secret organization, one that had been working for years to bring down the corrupt government that was leading the country into ruin. Volya was shocked and intrigued by this revelation. He had always suspected that there was something deeply wrong with the government, but he had never imagined that there was an organized resistance movement working to overthrow it. The mysterious person went on to explain that the nanite
bomb and suit were part of a larger plan to destabilize the government and bring about real change. Volya was torn. On the one hand, he knew that the government needed to be overthrown, but on the other hand, he was uncomfortable with the idea of using such destructive weapons to achieve that goal. In the end, Volya decided to join the resistance movement and work with them to bring about real change. He knew that it would be dangerous and that he would be putting himself and his family at risk. But he also knew that it was the right thing to do. And so Volya returned home to Gwen and Stacy, determined to use his skills and knowledge to help bring about a better future for them and for the country as a whole. Together, they would fight for what was right and just, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. The Hatred. The news of Gwen and Stacy's death hit Volya like a ton of bricks. He couldn't believe that they were gone, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt for bringing them into his dangerous world of espionage and revolution. Volya was injured in the attack that killed Gwen and Stacy, but he managed to survive. He was left with nothing but a burning desire for revenge against the corrupt government that had taken everything from him. With his knowledge and skills, Volya quickly became a valuable asset to the resistance movement. He threw himself into the fight with a ferocity and intensity that surprised even his closest allies. He was a man possessed, driven by a deep sense of loss and a determination to make those responsible pay for what they had done. The explosion that destroyed Volya's home and killed Gwen and Stacy was devastating. Volya was filled with grief and rage, and he swore revenge against the government and those responsible for the attack. Despite his injuries, Volya continued to work with the resistance, using his expertise to create new weapons and technologies to help them in their fight. He was more driven than ever, and his grief only fueled his desire to see justice done. Slowly but surely, the resistance gained ground, and the government began to crumble. Volya knew that their victory would not bring back Gwen and Stacy, but he found solace in the fact that their deaths had not been in vain.
In the end, Volya emerged as a hero of the resistance, revered for his bravery and his contributions to the cause, but he never forgot the pain of losing his family, and he never stopped fighting for a better world, one where no one would have to
suffer as he had. And so Volya Frolov continued to work and create, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible, always striving to make the world a better place. Though he was haunted by the memory of his loved ones, he never let his grief consume him, but instead used it as a source of strength and inspiration to keep going, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. Chapter 10. The corruption, Volya's grief and obsession with his work had driven him to dark places. His machines and weapons became increasingly grotesque and vile, and he conducted unethical experiments that left even his closest allies scared of what he was becoming. Some whispered that Volya was becoming as corrupt and ruthless as the government they were fighting against. Oh, that his quest for revenge had corrupted him entirely. But others argued that they needed Volya's expertise and his creations to win the war, and that the ends justified the means. As the resistance fought on, Volya became more and more isolated, his focus solely on his work and his thirst for revenge. He became increasingly detached from those around him, even from those who had once been his friends and allies. In the end, Volya's creations proved to be instrumental in the resistance's victory, but at a great cost. Many lives were lost, and the horrors of Volya's experiments left a dark stain on their cause. In the aftermath, Volya disappeared, leaving behind only rumors of his continued experiments and creations.
Some said that he had become a mad scientist, lost in his own world of machines and devices.
Others claimed that he was working on something even more terrifying than before, but regardless of what became of Volya, the Resistance knew that they would always be haunted by the memory of what they had done to win the war, and the knowledge that they had relied on the twisted genius of a man who had lost his way. Chapter 11, The Pain. Volya's grief and obsession had left him an empty husk, corrupted by guilt and regret. He spent his days holed up in his workshop, surrounded by machines and devices that reminded him of his family, tortured by the memories of what he had lost. At first it was small things, a locket that Gwen had given him, a toy that Stacy had loved to play with, but as time went on, Volya's creations became more elaborate, more intricate, more twisted. He built machines that mimicked the sound of Gwen's laughter, devices that recreated the smell of Stacy's hair. He constructed
Intricate dioramas of his home, meticulously crafted down to the tiniest detail, only to destroy them again and again. It was a form of self-torture, a way for Volya to punish himself for his failures, to wallow in his own grief and guilt. He knew that what he was doing was wrong, that it was only making things worse, but he couldn't stop himself. And so, Volya remained alone and lost, trapped in a cycle of regret and longing, unable to move on from the past that had destroyed him. Every morning, Volya would wake up to the same thoughts. Thoughts of Gwen and Stacy. Thoughts of what could have been if he had been able to protect them. And every night he would go to bed with those same thoughts, unable to escape the memories that tormented him endlessly. He tried everything to ease his pain. Alcohol, drugs, even meditation, but nothing seemed to work. The memories were always there, lurking in the back of his mind, waiting to pounce on him when he let his guard down. Sometimes Volya would scream into the empty workshop, cursing himself for his failures, for his inability to save the people he loved. Other times he would sit in silence, staring blankly at the machines and devices that he had created, wondering what had gone wrong. But no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, Volya couldn't escape the memories. They were part of him now, a constant reminder of what he had lost and what he had become. As the memories of his family continued to corrupt him, Volya found solace in creating robots that resembled his loved ones. He spent countless hours designing and building the machines, each one a painstaking replica of Gwen or Stacy. At first, it was a way to cope with his grief, a way to keep their memory alive. But as time went on, Volya became obsessed with the robots. He would spend all day working on them, tweaking and refining their designs until they were perfect. It wasn't long before Volya's colleagues began to worry about him. They could see the toll that his obsession was taking on him, the way that he would talk to the robots as if they were his real family, the way that he would get angry and lash out if anyone tried to take them away. Despite their concerns, Volya refused to stop. He saw the robots as his only link to the family that he had lost, the only way to keep their memory alive, and so he continued to work on them day after day, night after night, until they were so perfect that they could almost pass for human. But as much as the robots brought him comfort, Volya knew deep down that they were no substitute for the real thing. No matter how advanced the machines were, they could never replace the love and warmth of his family. And so he continued to work, hoping that one day he might find a way to bring them back. Volya was furious when he found out that one of his colleagues had tried to take one of his family-resembling robots. He saw it as a betrayal and an attempt to take away his only solace in his grief. He confronted the colleague who tried to explain that he was only worried about Volya's mental health and the safety of those around him. But Volya would not listen, and he lashed out both verbally and physically. The incident caused a rift between Volya and his colleagues, who were already uncomfortable with his increasingly disturbing behavior. They knew that he was teetering on the edge of madness, and they feared what he might do next. But Volya was beyond reason or persuasion. He retreated deeper into his obsession, continuing to build more robots and devices that reminded him of his family, and he became increasingly paranoid and aggressive towards anyone who tried to intervene. Chapter 12. Healing. Volya woke up from his dream, tears streaming down his face. It had been so vivid, as if Gwen had really been there with him. Her words echoed in his mind. "Let go, it wasn't your fault."
Volya knew that Gwen was right, but he couldn't bring himself to believe it. He had been carrying the weight of guilt and grief for so long that it had corrupted him, but her words gave him a glimmer of hope, a possibility that he could find a way to let go of his pain, and he'd move forward. Volya knew that it wouldn't be easy, but he made a decision to try. He knew that he needed help, and he reached out to his colleagues, apologizing for his behavior and
asking for their support. Slowly but surely, Volya began to make progress. He started seeing a therapist and talking through his feelings. He also started building machines and devices that were not designed to harm or destroy, but to help and improve the world. It was a long and difficult journey, but Volya finally found a way to let go of his pain and honor the memory of his family in a positive way. He knew that he would never forget them, but he could live a life that would make them proud. Chapter 30, the end.
Revenge had corrupted him and caused him to lose sight of what was truly important, his family and his humanity. As he looked at the machine he had just built, he knew that it had the power to destroy and create. He decided that he would not use it to destroy, but to create a better world. He spent his final moments programming the machine to create renewable energy sources that would benefit future generations. Volya is now an old man, filled with regrets and haunted by his past. He spends his days alone, reflecting on his life's work and the consequences of his actions. He realizes that he cannot undo the things he has done, but he can still make a difference by sharing his knowledge with the next generation of inventors. So he begins to write down his inventions and ideas, hoping that they will inspire future generations to use their knowledge for the betterment of humanity.
As he finishes his last entry, he closes his eyes at peace with himself and his legacy. The machine was unstable and not properly tested. As Volya disintegrated, the machine exploded, destroying his laboratory and everything in it. The news of his death spread quickly, and his colleagues and friends mourned the loss of a brilliant mind. However, many also felt a sense of relief, knowing that his dangerous and unethical experiments would no longer continue.
Years later, Volya's legacy lived on through his inventions, which continued to shape and impact the world. While his name had become synonymous with controversy and tragedy, there were still those who admired his brilliance and ingenuity, but for those who knew him well, they knew that his true passion was his family, and that he had sacrificed everything to try and bring them back. The machine that Volya built was a time machine. As he disintegrated, his consciousness was transported back in time to the moment before his family's death. He realized that the mysterious person who sent him the plans for the nanite bomb was actually him from the future, trying to prevent the tragedy that he had already experienced. With this knowledge, Volya was able to prevent the bombing of his home and save his family. He abandoned his obsession with machines and instead dedicated his life to spending time with Gwen and Stacy, cherishing every moment with them. As he grew old, Volya had no regrets, knowing that he had done everything in his power to protect and care for his loved ones. And as he passed away peacefully, he knew that his family would always be with him, not just in his memories, but also in the future that he had helped to create. The machine whirs and sputters, its lights flickering as it finally shuts down. All that is left is a small, blinking light on the control panel, signaling the end of Volya Frolov. The people who knew Volya mourned his passing, but they could not help but feel a sense of relief. His obsession with his work had corrupted him, leading him down a dark path that ended in tragedy. But some say that in the final moments of his life, Volya had found a kind of peace, that as he disintegrated, he had finally been able to let go of his regrets and find closure with his past. Regardless of what happened in those final moments, Volya Frolov's legacy lived on. His inventions and contributions to the resistance had helped to bring down a corrupt government and pave the way for a better future. And even though he was gone, his memory would not be forgotten.